Hello! Video Game Hunter here, and welcome to another Why You Should or Shouldn't Get series, where today I'll be focusing on why you shouldn't get a Retron 5. Now, I know in my previous videos I did talk about why you should get the system. Well, now it's time to give you guys that part 2 of that video. So that said, let's take a look. Reason number 1.
I think one of the most common complaints I hear about the Retron 5 is how tight the cartridge slots pins are on your games. It seems like a lot of people are worried that this much tightness might scratch or damage the pins on your cartridge so bad that it might become unreadable. Well, I have tested out each cartridge slots on my Retron 5, and the only difference that I noticed that gave some extra tightness is the NES and Super Nintendo slots. Now, I'm not too worried about this since I haven't noticed any damage on my game's pins after many uses of my system. But I thought this might be some worthy information to give to some people who are worried about damaging the games from this extra tightness from the Retron 5.
Reason number 2.
In my last video, why you should get a Retron 5, I did mention that there is a positive and a negative about this console being an emulator system. And since I already talked about the positive, here's my negative. Unlike the original console like the NES and Sega Genesis, you can pretty much pop in any game except for maybe for certain imports and play them just fine. But here, it might be a different story. Like I mentioned, this is an emulator console, and just like any emulator you download on your computer, it might need a couple of updates to make certain games to run properly. For example, I actually have a game, Sonic 3, that wouldn't run correctly at first. The game will actually freeze on the first level at the same exact spot where the level does its little transition of its scenery. However, the later firmware patches did in fact fix this, but I have heard there were other games that also had this issue. Now, I'm not saying that all games will now work fine and dandy with the Retron 5's latest firmware patches, but if you're one of those collectors who also collects homebrew, hacks, or bootlegs, there is a chance that those games will not work right or display the game's graphics the way it should be. Now, personally, I don't really collect these type of games, but I do own one bootleg game, which is a Contra 6-in-1. Now, this game won't always work right on the Retron 5. Sometimes the game will crash as soon as it starts up, or sometimes there will be random lines at random places across the screen. Now, the last example I'm going to show you is a Mega Man 3 hack called My Little Pony Friendship is Magic Dr. Disco's Conquest. And for the most part, the game works just fine. Matter of fact, I even beat this game on the Retron 5. But some of the game's objects do display the wrong colors. But the most noticeable one is the fact that Twilight is blue when she's actually supposed to be purple.
Reason number 3.
So bringing up my other video again, I did mention that the controller that came with the system sucks. But I never explain why, so here's my quick review of the controller. First off, the controller is kinda bulky. If I attempt hitting any of these poorly layout buttons or squeezing this controller even the slightest, it always resorts to me hitting these two bumpers on top. Now, these bumpers may not do much on most of these games you play, but me constantly hearing this clicking noise is really annoying. And speaking of annoying, all these other buttons on this controller also make their own irritating clicking noise. Hell, even the joystick makes these clicking noise. Which, by the way, why do we even have a joystick on this controller in the first place? Unless you're going to play some classic arcade ports or 3D games, which there are not many of, like Sonic 3D Blast, but most of the games that people will play on here will be side-scrolling platformer games. And believe me, I prefer the D over the stick any day. Now, if I want to play with the analog stick, I'll just bust up my NES Advantage or any other controllers that I have and use it on this system. The only good thing I have to say about this controller is that it's wireless, and yes, it works well.
Reason number 4.
Now, after all the reasons I gave you on why you shouldn't get a Retron 5, this last reason I'm about to tell you really affected my decision on what games I should play on the Retron 5 and what games that should remain playing on the original system. So that said, my final reason why you shouldn't get a Retron 5 is because you can lose your save file that's on your game cartridge. You see, when you pop in a game like Final Fantasy III on SNES, not only will it rip your ROM out of the game, but it also rips your save file. The reason it does this is so you can continue playing your game from the last save point, which is great and all. However, once you save your game again while it's still in the Retron 5, it's not automatically putting the save file back on the game cart. Now, they do have a function in the Retron 5's game menu that will allow you to transfer your save game back to the cart, but the few times I tried using this feature, it absolutely did not work. And not only did it not work, but I completely lost all my save files, and there was no way for me to recover them. This really bummed me out, because I just started playing Breath of Fire on Super Nintendo, and I wanted to try playing this game on my Retron 5. But after all that,
I lost everything.
now luckily I wasn't too far in the game, but it still took me a couple of hours to get back where I left off. I don't know if anyone ever got this thing to work, but let this be a warning. If you ever feel like playing a game that allows you to save your progress like an RPG, and you're using a Retron 5, I highly recommend using the save state function instead.
And that's why you shouldn't get a Retron 5. Now, if I somehow convince you on not picking up the system, then may I suggest also watching my Why You Should Get a Retron 5 video. Because I have to admit, the Retron 5 does have some really awesome features. Like, for example, you can actually download some fan translation patch and use it on some of those Japanese exclusive games. Like, for example, Star Ocean for the Super Famicom. But if that still doesn't convince you on picking up the Retron 5, then stay the hell away from it. Well, that's it for today. This is the Video Game Hunter, and until next time, goodbye.
Bring it back to 83. That's when the ponies came to be. Zach and Lee and the first generation were the originators. Here for 30 years, don't push something on me. Take a moment to check this. My Little Pony was supposed to appeal to both sexes. It's renewed, it's universal audience.